This therefore promises to be an interesting and illuminating seminar as we hear from our media luminaries, Ambassador Cabral Le Amihir, writer and former chairman of the National Media Commission, Mr. Ado, journalist, a veteran journalist, I should say. I used to watch him when I was a young girl. And communication. Mr. Kwesi Pratt, senior journalist and editor of the Daily Insight newspaper. Please, let's give them a warm round of applause.
The chair for the occasion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists, it's a privilege to speak any day on the prestigious platform of the IEA, an institution which over the years has used its platform to create discourse and debate on very fundamental national issues, such as the one we are having today. Having examined the topic assigned as AMES, right from the start, after the disclaimer on my status. The initial letter inviting me to the seminar dated May 11, 2023 gave the topic as amending the 1992 Constitution, views and reflections of the media. The subsequent flyer for the seminar read as follows: Reviewing Ghana's 1992 Constitution, viewpoints from the media. It's very important that I state that whatever views I express today are neither of the media nor from the media. About 2 decades ago, when I was then a practicing journalist, indeed played a leadership role in journalist associations in both Ghana and West Africa, who have claimed to be speaking for the media or for the media. But in today's today's expanded and varied media landscape, both traditional and new media, it is presumptuous for anyone to claim to speak for the media, unless a conference of any sort was organized and resolutions adopted. I speak today as an ordinary citizen of the land, who has lived through the 4 Republican constitutions Ghana has operated, and indeed played various roles in the public space, including one that saw me chair a constitutional body, the National Media Commission, for 6 years. Similarly, my membership of the IEA's Committee on the Winner-Take-All Politics and the 2012 Presidential Debate Committee gave me some insights into aspects of the Constitution that offer review and amendment. Accordingly, whatever views I express today are mine as citizens abroad. With this clarification, let me commend the IEA for this initiative aimed at relaunching a national discourse that would lead to amendments of the 1992 Constitution that I may do so with a note of concern. While the initiative of the IEA is proper, the question we need to ask ourselves is what happened to the report of the Constitutional Review Commission set up by the Mills administration, submitted as far back as 2011. You may recall that the CRC undertook quite an extensive nationwide consultation involving 57 sessions, and the National Constitutional Review Conference having received as many as 83,000 submissions from the public. That exercise cost the nation as much as $6.3 million. It is this same concern that prompted lawyer journalist Samson Ladi Ayeni to state a few years ago on the occasion of the International Day of Democracy, which falls on 15 September, that, and I quote him, "On this day, my take is simply to demand of government to tell citizens where we are with the constitutional review, or for which over $6 million was spent. It's a question that we must also ask at this seminar. We may not get a required answer today, but there can be no doubt that any new exercise to review the 1992 Constitution should, in the wisdom of the account and the Sankofa, simply go back to the massive breakdown by the Constitutional Review Commission and the subsequent white paper issued by the Mills administration as the basis for any discussion of the Constitution. And having agreed to participate in this seminar, I can also be able to proceed notwithstanding my view that the SRC covered enough grounds for the commencement of processes to amend the Constitution. The history of constitutional development from colonial times to date proves this fact, that all constitutions respond to the demands of the era in which they are written and seek essentially to answer or solve pressing issues of the day. We see this principle at play for the 1916 Clifford Constitution, which for border participation increased the membership made up of official and unofficial members from 9 to 22, and for the first time added 3 paramount chiefs. According to lawyer Maxwell in his book Constitutional Law and History of Ghana, Governor Clifford regarded this enlargement as the most important local event that occurred during his term as governor of the Gold Coast. When the Gettysburg Constitution was enacted in 1985, it responded to the demands of the times by giving the colony elected representation, just as the Banks Constitution of 1946 increasing the number from 11 to 18, and also extending membership to Ashanti for the first time. The enactment of the Constitution of 1951 and 54 were unique in the sense that they were written with the needed local participation and naturally saw a marked departure from the appointing powers of the governor for membership of the legislative councils. In these constitutions, membership of the legislative assemblies were through direct elections. This development was a response to the growing demand for self-government. The pre-independence constitution of 56, that finally ushered in the new Ghana on March 6, 1997, faced many hurdles, notably the unitary versus federalism debate, which not only threatened the independence of the Gold Coast as the United Ghana we have today. It may be recalled that the NLM and the NPP, that the Northern People's Party, which favored the federal Ghana, threatened secession, but the will of the majority prevailed. It is pertinent therefore to know that issues like a second chamber, which some people to this day advocate for, came up for serious debate that was rejected. The post-Nkrumah Constitution of 1969, among other things, sought to nip in the bud any drift towards one-party state and authoritarianism, and opted for the multi-partyism of the 57 Constitution, although state elements of control by the state, such as the control over the state-owned media, were not erased from the new Constitution. When Ghanaians came to writing the 22 Constitution, the nation, after its issue of their military interventions and regimes, essentially opted for a constitution that would guarantee more freedoms and human rights, economic and social justice, as loudly pronounced in the directives of the state. Under the Constitution of 1969, by building on the 79 Constitution, the 92 Constitution opened new frontiers for free speech and free press through Chapter 12 of the Constitution, with the establishment of the National Media Commission, which fundamentally ended government control of state-owned media and further created an enabling environment for the flourishing of private media. President Mills, in setting up the CRC in January 2010, fulfilled the pledge of almost all the presidential candidates in 2008 elections to begin the process for a review of the Constitution caused by a cross-section of Ghanaians for such an initiative. In the current state of Ghana, where the economy is the number one priority, one wonders whether the issue of constitutional reforms will dominate political discourse in the 2024 elections. But insofar as the concerns that drove the initial initiative for a constitutional review commission exists and are manifestly compounded today, it cannot be out of place for us to look at the issue again. As the CRC rightly noted in its report, quoting a 2005 report of the African peer review mechanism, there are many shortfalls in the 1992 Constitution, such as the large size of the cabinet and the fact that many ministers of the are sitting members of parliament, especially seen as undermining the separation of powers between the executive and legislature. Other issues highlighted were the independence of the judiciary and the underrepresentation of women in the democratic and governance systems. Whilst political leaders grapple with and promise to downsize the number of ministers of state, it should not be at their fiat. The nation's constitution must deal with that problem. Even the question of ex gratia for Article 71 holders, that was a matter of concern during term and engaged the CRC, has emerged as a hot political topic which only an amended constitution can effectively resolve. As able demonstrated by the IEA in the position paper titled Rethinking Ghana's Democracy, the case of unity or politics, the 92 Constitution has many deficits that ought to be addressed by an amended constitution. Having a hope added to the case for a review of the Constitution to address some of the challenges of the day, let me at this stage flag a few key areas that further justify a review of the 92 Constitution. I take this conservative and limited approach considering it is not possible within 20 minutes to do justice to what the CRC dealt with after months in a 1,000-page report on the government's paper address in 48 pages. Let me then begin with my thoughts on the future of the National Media Commission the body that I chaired between 2009 and 2015. So these are my thoughts on the National Media Commission. At the time of the writing of the 92 Constitution, the media landscape was not extensive and expansive as it is today. New media and social media had not emerged, and so the focus was on traditional media, notably print and electronic. Against such a background, I agree with the recommendation of the CRC that provisions of the NMC should be amended to specifically highlight the responsibility for all media, although that object is addressed when Article 167, which deals with functions of the NMC, makes reference to other media. I also agree with another recommendation that grants the NMC the responsibility for broadcast authorization, since it is that supervisory that to allow the NMC to effectively regulate content. It is important, even ahead of any constitutional review, that the long-awaited broadcasting bill that will bring sanity to the media landscape is passed. I believe Chapter 12, as it stands, gives the NMC every authority, as stated in Article 167B, to take all appropriate measures to ensure the establishment and maintenance of the highest standards in the mass media, including the investigation, mediation, and settlement of complaints made against the press or other media. Regrettably, I wish to submit, the NMC over the years has failed to take many such appropriate measures when it is empowered to do so by the Constitution. Additionally, the NMC Act and the Complaint Settlement Procedural Regulations has created an ADR platform for the NMC to settle complaints, whilst leaving the room for citizens who are defamed by the media to resort to the courts for redress. In my candid view, the key to making the NMC more effective is to take another look at the composition and ad hoc role of its 18 members. The CRC looked at the high normal and recommended a reduction from 19 to 11, which the government's white paper rejected, opting instead for a retention of the current membership. The orbit of the media has so expanded with the advent of new media, so much so that there is the need, in my opinion, to have a regulatory body that works 24/7 across the length and breadth of the media landscape. This role cannot be successfully prosecuted by an NMC composed of 18 members who, on average, meet about 6 times a year. When media infractions that call for the attention and action of a content regulator, which the NMC is, occurs on an hourly and daily basis, I believe you can borrow from the example of regulatory bodies in Francophone West Africa, such as Benin, where there is a full-time but lean regulatory body with only 9 members with a non renewable term of 5 years. The media, as a media stakeholder, is prominently represented on this body. With the Benin example, we have 3 appointed by the president, 3 appointed by professional media bodies, and 3 nominated by the National Assembly. The chair of this body is appointed by the president in consultation with the Speaker of Parliament. That's the situation in Benin. But I believe that Ghana can maintain the independence of a reduced NFC by allowing members to elect their own chairman, as is the practice today. Funding of independent constitutional bodies. The history of the last few years will tell us that one of the areas where these bodies are not able to be effective is their dependence on the funding from the consolidated fund. And so I fully support the recommendation of the CRC, which the government's white paper endorsed, that an independent constitutional fund, which some describe as a democracy fund, should be set up to liberate these bodies from the consolidated fund and make them truly independent and functional. The next item I flag is appointment of chairman, deputy chairman, and members of independent constitutional bodies. Recently, we saw the hullabaloo about the nomination of some members to the Electoral Commission. Against that background, I support the recommendation of the CRC, which was endorsed again by the government's white paper, that the appointment of the chair and deputy chair of bodies such as NCC, the Electoral Commission charge, the Director General and their members should be by the President with a prior approval of Parliament. Since I'm an advocate for the abolition of the Council of State, its involvement in the process becomes null and void. I'll come to the Council of State as I move on. Appointment of ministers. One issue that the CRC dealt with was whether Article 781 of 1992 that allows the majority of ministers of states to come from Parliament should be retained or amended. The recommendation of the CRC, which was endorsed by the government's white paper, was that the President should be allowed a free hand to appoint ministers from within or outside Parliament, with the proviso that ministers so appointed from Parliament may retain their seats. I hold a contrary view that for a meaningful separation of powers, Ghana should go back to the 1979 Constitution, where, as a rule, all ministers of state should be appointed outside Parliament. That where a member of Parliament is appointed a minister, such a person must quit his parliamentary seat. The current hybrid system of American-style democracy and the Westminster style does not promote the independence that we all seek for. I also endorse a recommendation by the CRC backed by the government's white paper that calls for 30% gender representation in all public positions. Now I come to the Council of State. Under the 1992 Constitution, the Council of State is supposed to play an advisory role in various situations where the President is sometimes obliged to act with explicit advice of the Council, and other situations where the President is not obliged to act on their advice. I had occasion as far back as 1994, to argue for the total abolition of the Council of State. In my view, under the presidential system Ghana has adopted, where the President is ultimately accountable to the people, he should be free to choose his own advisors. If it is true that the Council of State wields meaningful influence on our presidencies, then they should be equally blamed or praised for government policies and actions. I'm reminded of an inscription I read on the door of an aide of Boutros Ghali, the then Secretary General of the UN, who lost his bid for a second term to the Ghanaian Kofi Annan. The inscription read, and I quote, "The UN does what the US wants." The US was indeed against his bid and used his influence to end his tenure. By the very composition of the Council of State, which gives the President of the day the right to appoint as many as 11 members of the Council, and given the politicization of the election of regional members of the Council, it can be argued that the government of the day can pack the Council My concern is that members of the Council of State are never accountable to the electorate. I prefer a system that allows the President to be held fully accountable for all his actions, including the appointment of his ministers and advisors. I'm aware that such a measure, as I've suggested, would lead to many changes, since under the current constitution, the Council is called on to add its blessing to many decisions, particularly in the matter of appointments by the presidency. I sincerely believe that one way we can ensure checks and balances in our governance system is to have strong institutions, and above all, to have a true separation of powers as operates in the US, where Congress is able to impose death ceilings on the executive, and an independent judiciary holds both Congress and the executive in check. Then I come to Article 71 and ex gratia. Given the controversy surrounding Article 71, any constitutional review will have no choice than to make some critical amendments and some clarification on the issue. For instance, members of the NMC, as Article 71, do not receive ex gratia, defined to mean, in the case of beneficiaries of ex gratia, as end-of-term benefits. What they receive, that's NMC members, is accumulated back pay. I fully support the recommendation of the CRC, backed by the government's white paper, that the emoluments of all public officers, which include Article 71 holders, should be determined by the Independent Emoluments Commission, which will have as part of this structure the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission. This change will publicize all the perennial hullabaloo about ex gratia and bring some parity and fairness into emoluments paid to public servants. As the CRC ably highlighted, Ghana, after years of living under the 1980 Constitution, would love to see some amendments to strengthen and consolidate the many things of the 1992 Constitution. I hold a view that the journey for a review of the 1992 Constitution that started with the Mills administration will be completed in the nearest future. A careful reading of the report of the CRC showed that they favored the retention of many provisions in the 1992 Constitution, arguing that many provisions that the public wanted to be amended had served the nation well and not rock the boat. In adopting that position, they were probably guided by the sentiments of an American politician that the Constitution, and I quote, is a document that should fully be amended with great caution. Thomas Jefferson, the third US president, who was one of the authors of the US Declaration of Independence and drafters of the US Constitution, shared a similar view when he wrote that, and I quote, "I'm certainly not an advocate for frequent and contract changes in laws and constitutions. I think moderate imperfections are better be borne with, because when once known, we accommodate ourselves to them and find practical means of correcting their effects. However, after advising caution in amending constitutions, the same Jefferson advocated changes in institutions and constitutions to keep pace with changes in circumstances, new discoveries, new truths, and manners for people. Because changes in the 1992 Constitution would not happen immediately, but occur after a long process, including a possible national referendum, the political leadership, the three arms of government, must strive at all times to make the best out of what we have now. Not so much a perfect document, but a guide all the same for good governance. The words of an author, which I quote in conclusion, tells me that at the end of the day, good and visionary leadership can be the key to making the best out of the 1992 Constitution. And I quote this author, "However good a constitution may be, if those who are implementing it are not good, it will prove to be bad. However bad a constitution may be, if those implementing it are good, it will prove to be good." I want to repeat. However good a constitution may be, if those who are implementing it are not good, it will prove to be bad. However bad a constitution may be, if those implementing it are good, it will prove to be good. I think this is food for thought for all those who aspire to lead the nation. Thanks for your attention.
Mr. or Professor Chairman, fellow panelists, Honorable Minister of Information and Member of Parliament for the People's Republic of Ofuasi, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We should thank the IEA for the privilege of this invitation to join this panel comprising the great Kwesi Pratt and Ambassador Cabral Biame here, who taught me most of what I know in journalism. If you're pleased with my presentation when I'm done, it's thanks to what he taught me almost, 40 years ago, 1983. And if I fail, then it's simply because I was a bad student. Ghana is 66 years old. It's so young that, in fact, about 3.4, almost 3.5% of its population of 32 million are about the same age or older. That's about 1.1 million citizens are about the same age or older of the country. That's how young this country, this republic is. Our democracy is infant, even pre-pubescent at best, as is the 1992 Constitution, upon whose pillars the democracy, our democracy rests. On that score, some have argued that it's much too early to tamper with the Constitution. Of course, there have been earlier amendments back in 1996. But I've heard it argued that maybe we should leave it alone and have it tested over a much longer time before we tinker with it again. And that some of the contradictions and tensions can be resolved with practice, developing into conventions, and or use judge-made laws to resolve them, as and when citizens ask the Supreme Court for interpretation. But I also appreciate that even to arrive at that position of leaving it alone may itself require a thorough and sober debate, discussion, and analysis. And it's for that reason that we assembled here this afternoon, as have many other speakers who have preceded us. It is with this background then that I proceed to make my modest contribution to the debate. I'll focus my comments on 4 areas. 1, Article 78(1), which mandates the President to appoint a majority of ministers from Parliament. I'll look at the implications of the status quo and make my recommendations. Secondly, I'll look at local government. I'll briefly discuss Article 248, the provisions on political parties and election to local government units. And 3, related to that, I'll comment on Articles 242 and 243 on how MMDCs are chosen, touch briefly on the risks and mitigations, and make my recommendations. And then finally, I'll comment on what many analysts have called the excessive concentration of powers in the hands or bosom of the president. Some have called the winner-takes-all phenomenon. And then I'll conclude and shut up. Number one, Parliament versus executive relationship. Article 78(1) says that ministers of state shall be appointed by the president with the prior approval of Parliament, or persons qualified to be elected as MPs, except that the majority shall be appointed from among members of Parliament. This is obviously a hybrid between the presidential and parliamentary systems of government. The steep overlap between the two institutions, for me, signals a spirit, or the spirit signals that the spirit that motivated this provision, it was meant to be one of close collaboration and cooperation between the executive and the legislature, as against one that is motivated by separation. I'll say that again. The overlap, the steep overlap, to me, signals that the spirit that motivated it is one of close collaboration and cooperation between the executive and the legislature, as against one that is motivated towards greater separation. Now, this does have some merits. It can be argued that in a young democracy, there's merit in avoiding an undue adversarial relationship between the executive and the legislative branches that can lead to gridlock. We've got the example of the Third Republic, or that of the US, where we've seen government shut down in a stare down between the two arms of government. And the recent gridlock between the White House and the Hill over raising the debt ceiling. We also recall in the Third Republic, the refusal of Parliament to pass the budget, President Hilariman's budget. In a multi-party democracy, there's an assumption in principle that the opposition would check the party in government and provide a counterbalance. Indeed, that is what enables parliamentary systems to function, despite the entire executive being drawn from the legislature. So it's not fatal entirely that so many of the executive are drawn from the legislature, excuse me. But it does have demerits. MPs can be said to be in a beauty contest to catch the eye of the suitor president, and concern that this leads the legislature to becoming subservient to the executive. A second and more significant demerit and risk, in my view, is a scenario in which a president with a small minority is compelled by the Constitution to appoint the majority of his ministers from opposition benches. For the smooth running of the country, alignment between the president, whose vision got him elected by voters, by the electorate, and his appointees, assigns, delegates, is critical. Imagine a president with a cabinet dominated by opposition MPs as ministers of state. Here's my recommendation. That we can amend the provision from one that establishes a floor below which the president cannot fall, which is the status quo, to one that sets a ceiling above which the president cannot climb. With the floor, the status quo, the president can in fact appoint all his or her ministers from parliament if he or she chooses, and wouldn't be acting ultra vires. With the ceiling, the president can appoint all of his ministers from outside of parliament and be compliant with the law. Therefore, a president, in the scenario I painted, with a small minority, can still form a government by tapping some appointees from his side in parliament, but most from outside parliament if necessary. And I'll go to Article 248, political parties and election to local government units. And I'll quote sections 1 and 2. And as they say, with your permission, a candidate, there's 248(1). A candidate seeking election to a district assembly or any lower local government unit shall present himself to the electorate as an individual and shall not use any symbol associated with any political party. And 2, a political party shall not endorse, sponsor, offer a platform to or in any way campaign for or against a candidate seeking election to a district assembly or any lower local government unit. The case for the status quo is that this provision shields the assemblies from the rough tumble and turmoil of party politics at the level of the assemblies. 2, that the assemblies would avoid the excessive monetization or alleged excessive monetization associated with party politics. 3, that the status quo enables them to focus on the real business of the people at the districts and municipalities, rather than slide down the slippery slope of partisan gamesmanship and grandstanding and channel the energies on the business of the community. But there's a case against, and that is that although the provision may be well-intentioned or may have been well-intentioned, the practical reality contrasts that motivation, that intent, and that many, if not most, of the candidates do in fact contest with the sponsorship of political parties. And that assemblymen and women know one another's political leanings and membership. The second point to note is that the provision does not bar assembly members from membership of political parties anyway. It's just that they cannot contest on political party tickets, wearing party shirts, and fluting buntings, banners, and other paraphernalia. clearly. But as pointed out, this does not conceal reality, the reality from those who have eyes to see, ears to hear, and that is just about everybody. My view is that the noble intentions of the framers of the Constitution notwithstanding, as long as the Constitution recognizes the natural right of citizens to coalesce around ideas and assemble to promote them peaceably, and to do so in politics at the national level, I find it rather incongruous that to deny this natural right to the same citizens at the district level. After all of the political parties take their roots and branches from the districts and communities all the way down to polling stations. My recommendation, therefore, is that this provision be amended to enable candidates to contest on party tickets, and let us all stop pretending. This, however, does not shut the door to independent candidates, obviously. It only opens the door to party candidates who are hitherto barred. Allow the electorate to choose between party-sponsored candidates and independents. If it is indeed true that at the local government level, the people don't want party politics or partisan politics, the results will bear that out. It will show them voting overwhelmingly for independence. Let the voters decide. Having said that, I would recommend to keep Article 242D, which provides for 30% of assembly members being appointed by the president in consultation with traditional authorities and other interest groups. For example, retired professionals and specialists, civil servants, and so on, who can support assemblies with expertise that may otherwise be lacking in the districts. And I think that mitigates the fears about the assemblies taking the ruinous path into a partisan hellhole. 3. Election of MMPCs, Article 2431, which has been the subject of long-raging debate. But what does the provision say? And I will visit that provision 243.1 that says the district there shall be a district chief executive for every district who shall be appointed by the president with the prior approval of not less than 2/3 majority of members of the assembly present and voting. The president appoints the DCE with the prior approval of the majority of the assembly. This provision has been widely criticized as undemocratic and is cited as an example of the undue concentration of power in the bosom of the president. There's been widespread advocacy for this provision to be changed, and indeed an attempt to amend it was made by President Akufo-Addo, but he subsequently withdrew it because the opposition, who had initially indicated their alignment, subsequently allegedly changed its mind. Let's look at a couple of functions of the DC. He or she is the representative of the central government, Article 2432C. The DCE heads the executive committee of the Assembly. The DCE is also the chairman of the District Security Council, the DICER, which includes the District Police Commander, the Crime Officer, a representative of the Internal Intelligence Agency, the head of Customs, and so on. In the instance of political or social instability in the district, the responsibility falls on the DICER or the DCE to communicate with his superiors to ensure a timely resolution in order to ensure cohesion, peace, and security and harmony in the district. It is in consideration of these important and sensitive functions of the DCE that the framers of the Constitution thought it should be an appointed position, but mitigated by the prior approval of the Assembly. If DCEs were elected and on partisan basis, we could have a situation where the head of DICER, the chief, who is the chief representative of the central government, would be an opposition member, his opponent. This could easily lead to conflict between the president and district authorities. Ghana is a small unitary state. It is essential that the president commands authority throughout the country, and that there is political alignment between the president and, of course, the security services of which he is commander-in-chief. Even so, the appointing authority of the president, as indicated earlier, is not absolute. It is mitigated by Articles 2431 and 2433A. These provide adequate, by the way, 2433A addresses the ways in which a DCE can be removed, and district assemblies can remove the DCE with a 2/3 majority voting, passing a vote of no confidence in the DCE. And this therefore provides adequate guardrails that keeps the president's powers in check while recognizing the sensitivity of the office and functions of the DCE. Thus, in my view, we should maintain the status quo with regard to this provision. And my final point is with regards to the president's excessive, quote-unquote, excessive powers and so-called winner takes all. Some analysts have proposed proportional representation, some CSOs, some political scientists and so on, saying that allows minority parties a voice in the legislature and in the governance of the country's affairs. But it can also have negative consequences. Just look at Israel. How many elections they have had to hold over the last 2 years or so. Smaller parties can hang up and make a country ungovernable in such a system. Italy is another example where they've had so many governments over the last 40 years or so. The current experience of a near-hung parliament here in Ghana is another example where the executive can be held to ransom. It's not a bad idea if that leads to policy trade-offs. But in the hands of immoral and unconscionable legislators, it can degenerate into mercantilism, where legislation may only be delivered from a vending machine when the right amount of token is inserted. Instead, let's give a clear mandate to the president and the party and hold them accountable to deliver on their manifesto. Of course, you can have organic collaboration and consociation, driven and motivated by good governance, rather than by inflexible constitutional edicts. Now, as for the so-called excessive powers of the president, in one sense, we cannot vote for the president and at the same time deny him or her the authority to execute his or her vision based on which he or she was elected. I understand, and I stand to be corrected, that the president makes over 6,000 appointments. But I dare say that this is the case in theory only. In practice, however, no president, no king, no queen, no man can make 6,000 appointments all by himself or herself. Please permit me to quote Karl Popper in The Paradox of Sovereignty. No political power has ever been unchecked. And as long as men remain human, there can be no absolute and unrestrained political power. So long as one man cannot accumulate enough physical power in his hands to dominate all others, just so long must he depend upon his helpers. Even the most powerful tyrant depends upon his secret police, his henchmen, and his hangmen. This dependence means that his power, great as it may be, is not unchecked, and that he has to make concessions, playing one group off against another. It means that there are other political forces, other powers besides his own, and that he can exert his rule only by utilizing and pacifying them. This shows that even the extreme cases of sovereignty are never cases of pure sovereignty. They are never cases in which the will or the interest of one man, or if there were such a thing, the will or the interest of one group can achieve his aim directly without giving up some of it in order to enlist powers which he cannot conquer. And in an overwhelming number of cases, the limitations of political power go much further than this. There's a Malawian proverb that says, even the fiercest leader is overcome by sleep. In Ghana, the president appoints with the advice of, in consultation with prior approval of, and so on and so forth. And these are constitutional mandates. And even where there isn't a strict obligation to involve other institutions, the directive principles of state policy provide the broad framework adequate for the president, to which the president, adequate enough, which the president must pay attention to when making appointments. Gender, sensitivity and regional balance, and so on and so forth. Besides, there's a raft of stakeholders who do influence appointments. Even within political parties, there are various tendencies, left of center, right of center, moderates, and so on, who bring or make nominations to the president to consider for appointment. There are the youth wings, women's wings, women's organizations, and so on. There are chiefs, religious leaders, CSOs, and think tanks who all make inputs to the president for his or her consideration in making appointments. And so I shall conclude. Notwithstanding everything I've said, this is the constitution we have. It's not perfect, and I doubt there's a perfect constitution anywhere in the world. Nation building and the journey towards building the good society, where we are all on an eternal search for a sweet spot, struck between liberty, equality, efficiency, and community. Every day, through our trials and failures, our successes and triumphs, we are embarked on a long journey towards the ideal, towards which we must strive. We should not be misled or fooled by the imperfections, blemishes, or even the blunders of current generations into chopping and slicing our constitution at the least provocation, at the least sign of friction or conflict. Ultimately, I'm convinced that it is us who need the most amending, not so much the Constitution. It is a certain type of workman who blames his tools, and a similar type of citizen that blames his Constitution. In the great lyrics of Ephraim Amu in the anthem Yara Sasini, he ends with the admonition, "Omen ye sebe ye, omen ye serinye ye, eyen sen na hose omanfu bra na ebechre." He doesn't say eye omanumra and ebechre. He says eye omanfu bra and ebechre. To wit, whether this country will thrive or not, it is a matter of fact, asema edaho, that it is the character of its citizens, above all, that determines it. Thank you.
So now, my very esteemed colleague, a man that I respect so much, Kwekusi Chiado, went into the realm of Proverbs. As a matter of fact, Hitler was overcome by sleep. It didn't prevent him from killing millions of people and gassing many others. There are many others, Mussolini in history, Idi Amin in Uganda. And it's because the power of sleep is not sufficient to restrain tyrants that we have to make laws in order that we keep them in check. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss this critical issue with this audience, this very distinguished audience. Like many Ghanaians, I've been concerned with the obvious deterioration of constitutional democracy in our politics. Constitutional democracy, as a political practice, is intended to counter the concentrated power of the elite and give the less powerful majority a greater say in public affairs. contrary to what some might think, we on the left consider constitutionalism essential for national progress and for the protection of minorities, including minority political viewpoints. Many of my comrades have died fighting for constitutionalism. We have a stake in it. I am not a lawyer. However, constitutionalism is centrally about politics and governance. I've been an active participant in national politics for at least 40 years, and I've seen how people struggled under the 1969 Constitution, the 1979 Constitution, and the 1992 Constitutions. My views are based on this history, a historical materialist perspective, and a sense of today's urgent national priorities. I offer them humbly, intending to advance national understanding and progress. I will attempt 3 questions, only 3 questions. First, is meaningful constitutional review possible? Second, is the 1992 Constitution actually flawed, and how? And third, what kind of reforms do we actually need to address the critical flaws? I ask for forgiveness for any technical mistakes I may make. The first question, is meaningful constitutional review possible? Mr. Chair, the first question I had to grapple with upon receipt of your very kind invitation was whether this process holds any real value. Mr. Chairman, no formulation of words on a piece of paper will protect the poor against the rapacious elite. No constitution enforces itself. Outcomes depend on how people behave around constitutions, especially the governing elite. Often, calls for review and amendment of the Constitution are insincere attempts at deflection from official misconduct. There is more than enough by way of prescriptions, procedure, and standards of conduct in our Constitution for leaders of goodwill and public spiritedness to operate it effectively for the benefit of the people. Mr. Chair, the main reason why we have continual constitutional crisis lies not so much in poor drafting, but in the subservience of a political class to special interests. Unfailingly since 1992, president after president has overreached and abused his powers. Presidents have turned a blind eye to, or even participated in appointees' reckless dissipation of national resources. Presidents have tolerated institutional abuse of citizens' democratic rights. Presidents have supported or ignored undemocratic claims and illegal exercise of state power by traditional authorities. Presidents have ignored police and military violence against citizens. Presidents have even facilitated militia violence against citizens. Also, Mr. Chair, in case after case, Parliament has colluded with the executive in this bad behavior, either as often alleged in return for a dip in the pork barrel or out of sheer cynical laziness. Repeatedly, Mr. Chair, the Supreme Court too has shown what appears to many as spinelessness in interpreting and applying the Constitution. Our Supreme Court has not approached constitutional law as a mechanism through which the powerless can stand up and check the excesses of of the powerful. In all these repeated assaults on constitutionalism, the immediate objective of the officials may be personal or collective greed, individual or group arrogance, or sheer thoughtless incompetence. However, there's a pattern to it all. It works to hold in place a system of intensifying foreign economic exploitation of the Ghanaian and Ghanaian resources, which is the only source of the wealth our leaders seem to acquire overnight. And yet, Mr. Chairman, unfailingly, these same forces blame the demonstrated outcomes of their cowardice, irresponsibility, and betrayal of the Constitution on the Constitution itself, as if the Constitution somehow prevents them from behaving as decent, rational, responsible human beings. Mr. Chair, the fear of many is that the constitutional review process presided over by these same forces, our elite, will not address the problems of the downtrodden. For some, constitutional reviews are employed to pacify restless social forces and prevent an upheaval that might sweep everything away. And once the immediate danger of insurrection is past, the constitutional review is shelved. For some too, constitutional review is an academic or intellectual exercise with no true political agency. For others still, it is a ruse by which sections of the elite seek even more power for themselves at the expense of the poor. I sincerely believe that this process, this one, is not such a process. I believe that those gathered here are participating in good faith and out of concern that the rapid deterioration of our national politics may soon slip beyond anyone's control. I sincerely hope that elements of the political elite can see the writing on the wall and that they are willing to make substantive concessions in our economic system and reflect these in the political and constitutional system to avoid the looming catastrophe. In the hope of raising the level of public consciousness and at least contributing to such a process, the Ghanaian left must participate in this debate. Question number 2. Is the 1992 Constitution flawed? Mr. Chairman, the second question actually brings up the question of the nature of the flaws in the 1992 Constitution. Constitutions, however lofty their rhetoric, necessarily represent, idealize, and project a specific status quo. They are political instruments to express the balance of social and therefore political forces in a society at a particular time. They promote specific social interests and weaken others. They are not neutral in the class struggle that drives society. They are seldom aspirational and seldom dynamic. If the socio-economic arrangements a constitution is designed to protect are anti-people, then I believe the constitution is necessarily flawed. Understand the 1992 Constitution to be the legal culmination of a long campaign of neo-colonial forces to consolidate the control of the Ghanaian state apparatus and leadership of society that imperialism launched with the 1966 overthrow of the First Republic. It reflects the neoliberal agenda consolidated finally during the PNDC era by an easy alliance of the most organized socio-economic forces of the day with support from the West. these forces, by 1992, had exercised the left and dispensed with all but the rhetoric of nationalism and mass mobilization once associated with the so-called 31st December Revolution. The Constitution is a consolidation of neoliberal neocolonialism. It is fundamentally flawed, and this is what is revealed by the tension between its institutional and ideological operations. Ideologically, the Constitution self-presents as a national consensus. It claims to provide substantive equality among citizens. It declares citizens' fundamental human rights and dignity. It claims to provide for the exercise of government powers only for the collective benefit of citizens. It equally enjoins politicians, bureaucrats, institutions of state and ordinary citizens to behave democratically, fairly, accountably, and peacefully, and provides for redress where this is not the case. However, in making all these lofty declarations, the Constitution ignores our society's glaring class and economic inequality. With extreme variations in economic power, legal equity is nothing but hollow. What the Constitution does, as opposed to what it declares, is provide the arrangements that the elite believe incorrectly would lock the social order that had come into being by 1992 in place. What are some of these arrangements? We have, for example, political party and electoral system that requires increasing financial resources to access presidential power, incentivizes public corruption, makes politicians beholden to all sorts of business interests rather than the electorate. Centralization of state power in the executive, necessary to push through inevitable and popular neoliberal policies. Subordination of the legislature to the executive by patronage, allocation of cabinet positions, and the regular need for campaign patronage resources. Exclusion of organized ordinary citizens from democratic participation in decision-making by the complete subordination of local to central government. For example, the presidential appointment of district chief executives and 1/3 of assembly members rather than by the citizens they serve. The elimination of the right to recall, the executive power to appoint, expand, and pack the bench, ensuring that the executive can overrun troublesome judicial decisions. There's a constant tension between our economic reality and the ideology of our constitution. And in that tension, the poor marginalized always lose out. There is no such thing as popular neoliberal mass exploitation. Neoliberal mass exploitation cannot be popular, and there's no such thing. Neoliberal stability requires repression. Powerlessness is the only condition under which people accept abuse. The deterioration in constitutionalism that we are experiencing today reflects the collapse of the ideological veneer of the Constitution and the increasing visibility of the rapacious reality of our system. The first to realize that things are coming to a head are the political elites that wield power. But awareness is spreading increasingly to ordinary Ghanaians. Our middle classes, those with the greatest enthusiasm for constitutionalism, are in complete panic. This fundamental contradiction can only be resolved in one of two ways. One way is for ordinary Ghanaians to gain sufficient consciousness and organization to end neoliberal economic relations and perhaps neo-colonialism and build a self-reliant economy based on mobilizing all our people and resources. If that happens, the people will also develop, demand, and operate new governing relations that reflect this agenda. In other words, we will upgrade our constitution. The other part of the resolution, which seems to be the one we are walking down now, involves the elite taking off the kid gloves and attempting to rule openly with iron fist, while still claiming constitutional authority for the status quo. Of course, this would only hasten the demise of the neoliberal constitutional order. The chairperson, the next important question: what can we change in the constitution to stave off disaster? Mr. Chair, as indicated, I support fundamental constitutional reform. There is not enough time in this current engagement to offer a complete analysis of the text of the Constitution and how it can be improved. It is only possible immediately to list some key issues here, hoping to spark further debate in the weeks and months to come. I believe that we can develop a new system of government that meets our developmental needs. So I will list general clusters of governance issues. Others can address the legal niceties. As you do know, I'm not capable of that. Mr. Chair, in the little time left, I will look at the following. The preamble as the point from which all other constitutional provisions should flow. Chapters 5 and 6 as our fundamental Bill of Rights and Obligations among citizens and between citizens and the state. Chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 20 describe our fundamental institutions of government where we think fundamental change is needed. Chapter 12, of course, deals with media rights and practice, which has been my passion and my profession. Chapter 21 addresses the fundamental question of how we define and manage our natural resources. Chapter 22 addresses the place of chieftaincy in our national life. Now here is my commentary. The preamble of the Fourth Republican Constitution is excellent. We have disposed of the reactionary formula, the chiefs and people, that marred earlier constitutions and expressed constitutional making as a popular act. We still have a meaningless reference, and this is important. We still have a meaningless reference to Almighty God in our otherwise and logically secular constitution. The chairperson. 5 and 6, fundamental human rights and directing principles of state policy. These chapters contain lofty sounding provisions that express a national view on the innate dignity of citizens. For ordinary citizens, they are mostly not enforceable. I'm told that the Supreme Court has held that Chapter 6 of our Constitution is unenforceable, a great tragedy. Additionally, Chapter 5 consists mainly of statements of individual rights. Without grounding in clear socio-economic rights, individual rights can seldom be enforced by the marginalized who theoretically need their protection most. They are otherwise of little value, especially as institutions like the court are biased against the weak. The two chapters should be bundled into a substantive and enforceable bill of collective and personal rights that protects the small against the concentrated power of the elite, as democracy is supposed to do. Many argue that the Constitution should not regulate the internal structure and operations of state commissions. The Constitution should address the three main branches of government and leave the rest for lower level legislation. The executive. Many Ghanaians believe that the executive branch of government is too powerful. A strong executive is desirable in a developing country. But a strong executive does not mean that a single person should be calling all the shots. We should limit the scope of presidential power as indicated above. Our key proposal would be to: 1. Dissolve considerable executive powers down to the district assemblies, where they can be performed more effectively and more accountably. And this proposal links directly with the function and operation of the legislature and local governments. The President, assisted by ministers, should also directly manage the following: international relations, national defense, central planning, finance and central banking, national infrastructure, higher education, special curative health care. She or he should also oversee commissions responsible for setting standards, licensing, and monitoring the performance of devolved government services like basic education, primary health care, and local clinical care, agriculture and natural resources, public safety, sports and culture, and elections. In general, we also need the following: provisions for political parties to exercise a right of recall on presidents who renege unreasonably on sponsoring political party policy positions set out in a manifesto or party constitution, or who otherwise breach their oath of office. Complete separation of legislative and executive branches of government so Parliament can play its watchdog role effectively. A reduction in the number of institutions whose heads and governing bodies are appointed by the President. A limit to the number of Article 70 appointees. Changes to the system for fixing emoluments in Article 71 to make these a simple, permanent multiple of basic salaries in the public sector, and separation of the functions and persons of the Attorney General, who happens to be the government lawyer and Minister of Justice, Manager of Prosecutions and Law Enforcement Agencies. Finally, we need an explicit authorization on Monday for the executive to pursue continental unification. The building of the United States of Africa is imperative, and we need to have that as a constitutional imperative. This institution are now on the Council of State. I've heard the views of Cabral, and I've heard the views of my brother and friend, Kwekusi Chiado, and I'm not in disagreement. I'd like to state very, very simply that this institution is simply a patronage mechanism that produces very little value. It's a drain on our resources, and it should be abolished as quickly as possible. The legislature, the preamble to the Constitution says, the sovereignty of Ghana resides in the people of Ghana, in whose name and for whose welfare the powers of government are to be exercised, in the manner and within the limits laid down in this constitution. As a country, our legislative process is fragmented. The disconnect between local and national assemblies weakens both. This disconnect ensures that ordinary Ghanaians have almost no input into legislation, and that our priorities do not really feature in national agendas, which are worked out primarily with foreign donors, banks, and companies. We also spend too much on maintaining a national legislature. If we had an executive focused on long-term development planning for the country, these plans will break down into geographic and sectorial components suitable for debate at district assemblies and within sector commissions. Feedback from this level could percolate up and down the hierarchy. Central government officials will collect and reconcile these into a national plan and implementation sub-programs. In this case, we would only need a legislature that convenes for example, only 4 months in a year to consider and approve these final plans and the institutional arrangements created for the implementation. We would not need full-time professional members of parliament. Assemblies and recognized institutions, like the trade unions, would elect MPs to represent them in a national debate on the plans. MPs would necessarily reside in the communities they represent. They will receive appropriate allowances and excuse duty for their annual stint in Accra, updating the national plan. The judiciary. Of course, everybody knows that this needs urgent re-engineering. We need to innovate or restore the community-led courts that provided public order, justice, reconciliation quickly and inexpensively to ordinary citizens at the community level. Freedom and independence of the media. It is my considered view that representation of the National Media Commission is completely biased in favor of elite groups. And we need to look at that. It may be helpful to include trade unions and African traditional religion adherents. If you look at the membership of the National Media Commission, why? Only 2 religious sects are represented. We believe in secularism. We believe in the right of all people to believe whatever they want to believe. And indeed, if we were to look at religious practice in our society, we cannot help but come to the conclusion that the majority of our people are adherents of traditional religion. They go to the Catholic Church, they go to this, they go to that. When it comes to child baby, to marry, to all those things, what are the practices that are used? Again, I think it's important, and it's not in my script, that we do not use other instruments to muzzle the media. And the point that was made by Cabral Biamihia and Kuku Sechi Ado about the Media Commission's role in granting access to what is it, airwaves and so on, should be considered quite seriously. Decentralized and local government, I'm just about to finish. Ghana needs a more radical devolution of governance than we have seen in the Fourth Republic. Power is over-centralized, so decision makers lack the information and context required for good decisions and accountability. We believe basic education, primary health care and local clinical care, agriculture and natural resources, public safety and law enforcement, sports and culture and elections should be fully transferred to the assemblies. This decentralized system will create more and better local government jobs, and it will instigate more significant and more rapid development around the country. These reforms will require the removal of presidential powers to appoint assembly members and DCEs. Lands and natural resources. The ownership and management of natural resources are at the core of our national development crisis. It is time to confront the issue. The state should assert allodial title over all natural resources within our borders and territorial waters. It should, after that, grant leaseholds on all surface land to assemblies. Assemblies must develop special plans. Chieftaincy, chieftaincy. Ghana needs a national discussion about chieftaincy. Our constitutional provisions on chieftaincy are strange, very, very strange indeed. The framers of the Constitution went out of their way to protect the institution and its operations, even from Parliament's legislative remit. Protection not afforded even to the other branches of government. Finally, the chairperson, as I indicated earlier, 30 minutes cannot be sufficient for a full discussion of a complex document like the 1992 Constitution. All I'm trying to do is to raise some issues of principle, and I'm sure that others, better informed and more articulate, will carry on this conversation for the good of our country. Once again, I thank you most sincerely for the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much.
Create conflict. You could also open up to everybody. If we go to vote, and this is the will of the people of Ghana, then we must represent it. We should not do anything to stop minority views from being represented for as long as it represents a constituency. And the other thing is that it will provide for a more equitable distribution of voters in terms of the MPs. Because how do we justify one MP having 100,000 votes and somebody has 6,000 votes and yet they have equal votes? It is unfair. The proportional representation will ensure that the adequacy of the voter to the representation is sufficient. And so I said that in looking at proportional representation, we should not look at the negatives. And one other thing that proportional representation can bring us is the emancipation of women. Because no matter, nobody can make any law. You can make all the laws. They are talking about affirmative action, this. We can pass all the laws. We say that women should be represented. If in my constituency, the people decide that they will not vote for a woman, how will you get that woman into parliament? And any other thing apart from popular vote will not be fair. Because in the other jurisdictions that we are commending, like Rwanda and all that, it is the president who determines which one should go into parliament. And there's no way that he's going to allow every woman to go into parliament unless looking at the background of that particular woman. If we have proportional representation properly adopted and we compare the parties on affirmative action, and that's what happens in South Africa. When you are preparing the list, a man, a woman, a man, a woman, a man, and a woman. So if you have 100 constituencies depending on your vote, then there will be 50 women and 50 men. Unless we do that, the question about getting more women in parliament will not materialize in my lifetime, and I don't know whether it will materialize in the lifetime of my son. But let me thank the IEA that they have found it necessary at least to invite people from the media also to share their thoughts on how they think that we should be governed. We have a plethora of ideas now, from the extreme left to the extreme right. Some of us are in between. We are neither left nor right. Yeah, because there are some of the views I've been shared today that me as a person, I will never share. But I disagree completely with those things. Yeah, but the beauty of democracy is that we allow everybody to say what they want to say. We synthesize that, and at the end of the day, the majority takes a decision. And what the majority decides then becomes what we should all apply ourselves to. And so that we all make a contribution. And nobody is left out in the deliberations. It is not every idea that will get expressed or that will find a way into some of the things. But to enable people to freely offer their views, it is something that we must tolerate and accommodate at all times. And for that, I am very, very grateful. And on behalf of the media of Ghana, we want to say thank you, IEA, that when you are looking at the spectrum, you realize that we too, we do not just come here, listen to people and go and write. But we too, we have something to say for others to hear and for others to write about. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our distinguished speakers for provoking us the way you have done. I've hosted quite a number of programs on this subject, and I have participated and written around it. To avoid the temptation of speaking too much about my view in respect of what has happened, I have just put down some points, so please permit me to read it. Ambassador Cabral, you truly represented practitioners like me, and you were spot on with the anchor of your presentation that the CRC report, the biggest socio-political data ever gathered in the country, with the greatest participation of the citizens, valued at over $6 million United States dollars, must be the basis of any further constitutional review projects. It must be. What a brilliant, soul-enriching job by Kweku Sechiado. But yes, Kweku, no power is unchecked. Let's check the imperial president's power to make over 6,000 appointments nonetheless. The power may be unchecked. Let's check it nonetheless. Or it may not be unchecked. Let the rules say it is checked. Even if we could guarantee that we shall have a group of good people to implement the bad aspects of the Constitution, let's still let the rules limit the hand of a president who thinks that a small unitary country like ours should have 100 plus over 2 dozens of ministers, and that is justifiable. Ghana is no better than those countries where DCEs are elected on non-partisan basis. A CDD survey shows nearly 80% of citizens want it this way, contrary to what our president thinks. It is a most undemocratic conduct to hold a referendum in the middle on this question. Just let the people decide, Mr. President. I conclude by saying that a laundry list of articles impoverishes this discussion. A brainy lawyer and researcher, Oliver Bakavomawo, has noted. I agree with him. But I adopt the list in the nature of the framework for review advocated by the Honorable Osei Mensah-Bonsu. And Mr. Pratt Jr. re-echoes some of those points. We all remember the majority leader's seminal paper delivered at a public lecture at KNUST on the 12th of July 2022. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Cabral is here, and Mr. Yabudu PROF is here. A lot has been said about the NMC being a toothless bulldog because it is unable to force its orders. So suggestions have been made that one way to cure this is for the NMC to be given the powers, perhaps of a high court, so it can enforce the orders that it makes. I will want to seek their views on this as to whether it will be helpful. And then also, suggestions have been made to the effect that Article 1623 has been the basis for some of our troubles we have in the media, in that provision of the Constitution opens the door ajar for every and anyone to come in and establish and operate. Suggestions again have been made for that provision to be amended. I want to know whether in so doing it will flow with the thinking of the framers of the Constitution. And again, I want to throw this to Ambassador Cabral and Mr. Yabudu. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would also like to comment on it.
Not much really. Thanks for the comments and the comments from Samson and Yini with regard to my views. I respect them. I disagree, however, respectfully. So I'm not dissuaded, or I'm not persuaded. I'm not persuaded, however, but that's what we're here. It's a crucible of different perspectives. There's just one thing that I wanted to mention. I'm not sure that I explained it well enough. I just running through my notes, I realized perhaps I didn't. It's about what I described as the ceiling for the appointment of ministers from Parliament. Just to elaborate for a minute. So what we have right now is a floor below which the president in making a ministerial appointment must not go. The ceiling prevents him from going beyond a certain number, and therefore flips, if you like, the spirit. So I would take, for example, the number of ministers of state coming from Parliament must not exceed, say, 20% or 25%. And that signals differently that yes, you can have some overlap, make appointments from Parliament, but would prefer that in order to maintain as much of Parliament's independence as possible, that the majority of your ministers, majority of the executive, come from outside without necessarily sacrificing a little bit of collaboration and cooperation between the executive and Parliament. So I just thought I would just elaborate on that. But otherwise, I don't have anything else to say. Thank you.
I think I'm to respond to Kofi. You raised two issues. One about the NMC. Powers to buy. I believe that for if you look at our history, where we had lived under the tyranny of military regimes and state control of the media, the framers of the Constitution really want a situation where we return to the bad old days. That explains why the frontiers were opened that wide. Notwithstanding that, I believe that the same constitution has, I think, Article 164, where it talks about public order and issues of that nature, which place some limitation on our liberty to operate. Again, in Article, I think 167, which I refer to, the NMC has been given the power to adopt measures through airlines here to regulate the media, and I lamented that we have not expected that having that much. I recall when I was the president, and in response to complaints about standards in broadcasting, we decided to come out with an airline, with the best of intentions. It was challenged by Kiba and died. And I think that the purpose for doing that was to, as it were, live up to our constitutional obligation. Now, you were talking about giving the NMC powers of a high court. First, you have to remember that the NMC's mediation process is an ADR. And when you are in the ADR atmosphere, you bring the two parties together and you try to use application, mediation to let them resolve the matter. And there are many instances where it has worked. And the courts are still there to make our punishments and the rest. So I don't think we want to turn the NMC into a court. I think we should never do that. If you look at the American Constitution, the First Amendment is enough, to guarantee press freedoms. Whilst they allow, those who feel that they are in favor of libel to resort to the courts, and you see what happened to President Trump in the case of the lady. So I will never be an advocate for making the NMC another tool of oppression. With regard to the question, I think somebody raised the question about and I think I made that also in my remarks. I sincerely believe that it was PC was calling for an expansion of the NMC to include other religious persons. We could broaden the membership of the NMC, but I don't think it's very effective. I've been there. We are 18 members. We meet about, as I said, only about 6 times a year. In between, it takes the chairman, if he's that involved, to push things. But it's not a full time. So that's why I would rather have a reduced membership for the NMC on a full-time basis. NCA is full-time. NCA, the whole setup, they have a board, they are full-time, they're able to then regulate the broadcasting space. Now, in the case of NMC, I don't know that maybe the last time how many times they have made this year. And all around us, issues are coming up. And in the kind of board situation that they operate, they have to wait, they have to summon a meeting, it takes about 21 days, or they can emergency meeting. But on the whole, it's business as usual. So they meet maybe in January, they are appointed in November, November. It takes about November, December, they don't operate. They start in January, they go for orientation, and then they meet. In between, things are happening. And that's why I believe that if you really want to regulate the media landscape, we should do it full-time. Because those we are trying to help to promote standards are breaking the rules full-time. And you want to approach it on a narrow basis.
Well, I can understand why this clamor for teeth and so on. And it is largely because many of today's practitioners have not gone through what we went through. If you go through what we went through, we would not be an advocate of teeth for the National Media Commission. And I'm happy that Kuku is here and Kabra is here. There was a time in the not too distant past where the expression of your view alone was enough to get you into a coffin. And I know many comrades who died. I know many practitioners who died as a result of their practice. And it was not because they published libelous material. And I'm happy that Uncle Sabukuda is here. It was simply because somebody in government disagreed with them and you die. You understand? And that is what informed the drafters of the Constitution being so careful about what powers can be used against journalists and so on. And I get surprised that practitioners are those who are constantly calling for teeth to bite them. They want to be beaten, and I don't understand it. You understand? The National Media Commission was never intended to have teeth. Its primary responsibility is to safeguard the freedoms of everybody, free expression. And free expression is not for journalists. It is not the property of journalists. Free expression is for all citizens, not journalists. So sometimes we, the practitioners and ill-informed members of the public, tend to assume that the right of free expression is for journalists. Who told you that? Every citizen has a right to write in a newspaper. Every citizen has a right to speak on radio. Every citizen has a right to post on social media. That is not the right of any professional group. So anytime the freedom to express is limited, it is limited not just for journalists, but for everybody else, citizens and foreigners. Now, the High Court is there, doing its work. Why do you want to take the powers of the High Court and give to National Media Commission? Let the High Court retain its powers and do its work. There is nothing in our Constitution and the current arrangement which prevents aggrieved persons from suing for libel and defamation. And when they do, those matters are determined by the High Court. Why do you want to have that power? To do what with it? So I am very worried when I hear about this, give them teeth, give them teeth. I don't want to be beaten. And I'm surprised that anybody would invite the snake to bite him or her.
All three of our panelists have given very good presentations. Now I'd like to ask, maybe put the pigeon, the cat amongst the pigeons. Will I be right in saying that this hybrid system we have of governance has not helped us? So, should we either consider a strict parliamentary system or a strict American system?
Presidential system.
Presidential system of governance.
Not to create America.
Because at the present moment, we don't seem to get transparency with regards to questioning the president. In the parliamentary system, you will have to come and stand at the dispatch box and answer questions direct to the hearing of the people. The hybrid system today, with Parliament being the weakest link, is not giving us that chance for the people to be able to consider, especially how the funds of the country are being used. So what do you think? Should we go parliamentary? Has it got to the time we should look at going parliamentary? Or has it got to the time of going to presidential system? Or we continue to keep this hybrid system and going forward, whether the hybrid system will really work for us? Thank you.
Shaibu Wadamu from the Islamic Education Unit. My simple question is, I frequent this engagement a lot, and anytime I come around, I hear very inspirational things from Ghanaians men and women of Ghana, be it in the academia or journalists or even the economist. So with this fine brain that always come here to churn out, why is Ghana where it is today? That's my second question. I just don't know what is wrong. Something Nadi on his show, I watch the show religiously. Anytime you bring very good resource persons and they talk about this country. So all these people, can't we put them together in one box? I just, maybe, I don't know. Thank you so much. But thank you very much.
All have not spoken about is the issue of the moral decay, the indiscipline, the deterioration of our society. If we all reflect, we know all of us are part of this problem. My question then is, how do we factor this if we have to review the Constitution in a way? I just think that the binary way of thinking, which someone just mentioned, I think NMC chairman mentioned, the binary way of thinking is what probably may have landed us where we are. If you are not NDC or you are not MPP, then anytime you think people, or you speak, people try to tag you. I find it really problematic. I'm asking, how can we articulate this issue? How can we, bring our senses to the fact that we are Ghanaians, and we really need to echo that in everything that we do to keep Ghana what it needs to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It really attests to the fact that we've had a great afternoon with so many insightful comments. Please, can we have your last final thoughts?
Thank you very much. It has been a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all for your comments. It's just a couple of things I'd like to touch on, including what I passed earlier from my friend Samson. You're right, and this is a common refrain about the excessive power of the president and number of appointments and so on and so forth. I think that my reflex is, it's important that you assign responsibility and hold the person or body or institution to whom that responsibility is assigned responsible. When no one is responsible, or when too many people are in charge, no one is in charge. And I think that's the philosophy behind the executive presidency. The buck stops with him or her. Of course, that's in theory, and as I did indicate, in practice, the president must, of necessity, because he is human, he or she has got 24 hours in a day like everybody else. And when I talked about the fiercest leader sleeping, obviously, and I'm sure Kwesi understands, I didn't mean it literally, but it basically says there's a limit to human ability, and therefore you must necessarily recruit, reach out, consult, seek advice, even though ultimately the signature on the appointment letter is yours. That's what the Constitution assigns to you. But the Constitution also says you must reach out. And even if the Constitution didn't say so, it's just common sense, because you cannot alone review thousands of CVs sitting in your office and choose the best of them. Maybe now it might be possible to ChatGPT. Maybe. But otherwise, just that our limitations as human beings means that we must reach out to other people. And for me, that is adequate. It's enough of a balance between assigning authority and calling that authority, holding that authority responsible, balancing that with sort of consulting and reaching out and democratizing the process by which those appointments are made. 2, proportional representation. You know, I'm sure, I have absolutely no doubt that if we had proportional representation in our country, right, and you had smaller parties backing out of coalitions, and we're having to have elections every 6 months or once a year, we would be sitting here asking for an amendment to the provision, to the Constitution, right? There is no perfect Constitution. So, you know, each one has its merits and demerits, its advantages and disadvantages. Ultimately, it's what we have. We go to people, she doesn't, but many people, well, most of us go to church or to the mosque and so on. We've got our Quran, we've got our Bible, but has that made us perfect? It hasn't. So it's, in the end, it's what we make of what we have. Ultimately, on Media Commission, I'm glad, I think that PC responded, you know, just as I would have wished. I think for many young people, and I'm not suggesting that you're young, but for many young people, they fail to imagine what this country was like 20, 30 years ago. And when you watch television and you have disagreements, you know, today we've got 300, 400 radio stations, more than that. There was a time when television had 2 channels, on and off. 2 channels, right? So a lot has changed, but it's important that we don't take what we have for granted. Yeah, we shouldn't take it for granted. But I do agree fully with Kwesi that if you're offended, if you're defamed, if you are libeled, you can go to the Media Commission or to seek redress, and it's better that we have a Media Commission that has bark but not bite. And if you want bite, they are the courts. And just one last thing. I recall there was a press conference at which Kwesi asked the question. This must have been like 86 or thereabouts. But just because of the question he asked at the press conference, he didn't sleep home that night and didn't go home for maybe another year and a half, because he asked the question that offended the powers that be. There were times when, in the middle of a program, Talking Point on GTV, it was stopped in the middle of it because there was an opposition representative. My TV program was stopped dead without any, by your leave, nothing. So we mustn't take what we have for granted. And media must strive for responsibility and respect of citizens, fellow citizens. We must respect our own citizens. We must respect audiences. That cannot be legislated. That cannot be put in the Constitution. That depends on our own morals. Thank you.
Yes, the journalists have spoken, so I will not join them. I have followed the exchange between our colleague over there, that's Yenini, and Kuku about the executive powers of our presidency. And I think we are talking about the presidency under the 4th Republican Constitution, not referring to any particular president. And I think that the concern expressed by our colleague is one that takes to the status quo before the French Revolution, where all the French kings would probably say l'état c'est moi, meaning that the state is mine. And that was manifest in imperial powers. I think what we are saying is that there should be a way, whilst reserving those powers that you refer to the president, there can be some areas of meaningful control. I mean, let's take what has become a controversial matter, appointment to the Electoral Commission. Obviously, any government that has come, if given the chance, will want to back the EC. And I think that the qualification to become a member of the EC is said that party operatives, not necessarily those, somebody may be a low background person, but he shares the position or is aligned to a party, doesn't mount stages. But in his heart, he supports a certain party. And if I were president and I had a chance to appoint people to the Electoral Commission, I would want to look for people that I share porridge with. I mean, if you look at the American Supreme Court, they pack it. It is not a secret. To the extent that when Obama, at the end of his term, wanted to appoint the current Attorney General, they stopped him. So it is in the nature of politicians, if things are loose, to put their people there. I think we should not hide that fact. And so we are saying that in certain appointments, particularly the ICBs, that's the independent constitutional bodies, the president can make the nomination, but involve Parliament. Let those key persons go through the parliamentary process. It allows the nation, to see where they stand on certain issues, and I think it makes them better servants for the position that they occupy. Now, if you take going all the way, we are talking about this decentralizing.
But there isn't much to say. All three of us have to a large extent focused attention on the text of the Constitution. But there's a lot more to the Constitution than the text. Okay? And I'm sure all of us have heard a certain narrative. Some people claiming that this Constitution was a gift from one person. Yes. Some people claiming that this Constitution was a gift from one particular political party and political tradition and so on. All of this devalues the essence of the Constitution and our capacity and willingness to defend the constitutional order. Because I know that this Constitution was not a gift from anybody. This Constitution was not a gift from anybody with PNDC antecedents. But this Constitution was fought for. And I know that in the course of the fight to build this Constitution, 246 Ghanaians disappeared. I know that thousands of people went to prison without trial, without charge or trial. And I know those who were many in the struggle for this Constitution to be adopted.
Some went into exile.
Many went into exile. So as a matter of fact, this Constitution is a product of the collective struggles of the Ghanaian people. We took it as it is because of our own opportunism. And I recall very closely, I'm sure that Professor Michael K. will recall, that there was a division in the Ghanaian opposition with regards to the transitional provisions and others. And some of us said, we cannot accept this constitution as it is. So we will not contest elections under this type of constitution. And we insisted that if there was no transitional government, nobody should contest elections. And I remember, Uncle Sam remembers quite clearly, I'm sure, those who said, oh, it doesn't matter, there are flaws in the constitution, but let us accept it like that. When we win the election, then we will change it. Professor Newman was the chief advocate of this line of thought. Now, the imperfections in that constitution have lived with us since 1992 because of this lack of fight in us. Because we don't want to confront issues and we want things on a silver platter all the time. That's what has brought us here. So the narrative about the Constitution itself, in addition to the text, ought to make it a living people's document for it to have a certain meaning and a certain expression. Now, like Cabral, I've been listening to all this thing about the excessive powers of the president and who he appoints and so on. My friends, in this country, one president has gone as low as appointing public relations officers of state institutions. So if you don't wake up, if you don't put checks and so on, very soon the president will be appointing the guardian boys for the various ministries. Finally, I want to repeat something that I've done already, and it's important for me to repeat it. I remember in the late 60s and early 1970s, the gentleman who is sitting in front of us was the superstar of Parliament. And having an opportunity to listen to him and see to him was like magic to many of us who were growing up then. He was then a member of Parliament representing the National Alliance of Liberals and so on. Professor Michael OQUAYE is somebody I can describe as my friend. Indeed, he's my friend. And I remember that there were a few conspiracies in which you know what I mean. I recall some meeting we had in London outside the view of everybody and what we discussed and how to do it and so on. I must be grateful for this opportunity to link up with these great men whom I disagree with ideologically and politically, but they are nonetheless great men. And I'm happy for the opportunity to be in their presence and to be able to speak for them to listen. I'm even happier that today Cabral is sitting here. And Cabral is a journalist that I've watched it, and he knows it. I mean, the 70s, where it was impossible to speak, he spoke. He wrote columns that you couldn't avoid. Great personality in the media, you understand? And more than that, today we talk about the Ghana Journalists Association and so on. He made the Ghana Journalists Association what it has become. And indeed, it was contributions from people like Cabral which led even to the inclusion of a National Media Commission in the Constitution. So when I talk about Cabral, I'm not talking about somebody who served as chairman of the National Media Commission. I'm talking about somebody who dreamed it and worked for it to be established. So, of course, that's what we all know. I mean, Koku's contribution to journalism in this country is huge. When he worked for the BBC, when he worked as editor of the Chronicle, his role in the Ghana News Agency and so on. This is an icon of our profession. Even though they do not express our collective views, their views are important because they were participants in the struggle to free journalism from the tentacles of military dictatorship. Because they were participants and because they helped shape the destiny of journalism, their views are important. And I'm happy to have been here to listen to these elucidating views from these great practitioners of our profession. I thank IU for making that possible.
My comments are always very, very brief. But permit me to make a couple of comments with regard to the work of the Constitutional Review Committee. We are very supportive for the document. But as a thing, and we also know that no single work is the end of wisdom. So we continue to interrogate, as our journalists often say, etc. Recently, I looked for my own copy of the document, and in fact, I appeared before the committee, made my views known. And it was my brother Gantua here who sent me the latest copy, which I'm keeping with a lot of security. And of course, Dr. Fledo was my contemporary labor. So we very much appreciate that. But I will continue as a think tank to say nothing is the end of wisdom. Before the ink was really dry on the Constitution, the IEA had started interrogating it. And that is long, long ago, because it had its own views and sought the views of other critics. And this should continue. Among so many other areas that need to be looked at, when the committee says, for example, that with regard to ministers coming from Parliament, the President should have the discretion to choose whether from Parliament or outside Parliament to the extent that he desires. Well, some people don't agree. They believe in either parliamentary system or the presidential system. And I think that matter also deserves further analysis. Right here about the judiciary, we've learned a very simple thing. The example in Kenya, where the judges themselves choose their chief justice. In other words, all judges of the Supreme Court, they vote and then choose one. What kind of political confusion can come out of this? So there is nothing to the end of wisdom. Because we continue to have this question, and I think it might be put to rest so that we seriously continue to examine and see what we can add or substitute with regard to established knowledge. In all dissertations, you are expected to write out what has been done already, and then you examine further to show what you are doing and is relevant. Is that not so? If you can't do that, you can't get a doctorate degree. And that is exactly the kind of thing that the IEA is committed to doing. Look also at, for example, the assemblies, the district assembly system. The president, if in choosing the DCEs, MCEs, will nominate 3 persons, and then the assembly will vote upon it. On what basis? On party basis, or non-party basis? But why should the president choose 3? Only for the assembly to elect. Some people also find this as not acceptable. Others may think it is acceptable, but we still need to examine it further and to know. So there are many, many areas that we continue to study and make analysis upon and see how we can improve upon the present situation. we have really had a very useful time. And I'm very, very proud of these gentlemen for coming to do us the honors. I can see the sheik nodding his. He's one of our real men here. He's an uncle here in this analysis. He is really nodding in approval. They have done us the honors very, very, very much. And for Mr. Eboafu, who has traveled all the way from Kumasi just for the program and back. At his own expense. And these are wonderful, intangible contributions to national development. And we have learned that amount brag na actually, but we can also teach the brag and find ways and means of political, social, education and institutions that can bring them about. Let us imagine this several centuries ago. And that is also, he says, the responsibility of the state. Well, we can still think of how that responsibility of the state can be further developed in our national interest as part of the study of constitutionalism. We have learned also about the power of the elite and how it can be checked. Of course, this elitism issue is very, very important in society. Society does not belong to a group of people. It belongs to all. And in fact, the more of equalization there is, the better that society. When the French people were killing their kings because they couldn't equalize, the English got better and quickly changed the power of the king and said the king reigns but does not rule. So it's all part of that kind of process. So what can we also do so that the elite will benefit, the non-elite will benefit, in fact, those who are the very, very down position will also benefit. What, in fact, impresses me most about non-elitism is that you don't have to come from a rich home to be the most brilliant person in computer technology. You can find a boy from the village or a girl from the village who can attain that height. So if you don't allow that person to also come up, then you are depriving the society of what it could have got from that poor girl somewhere who could have been the best gynecologist in Ghana. And I think we will need to also examine even this as part of our constitutional re-engineering in this our society. The business is not a one-day thing. And we thank everyone who finds it useful to come and participate. Issues of affirmative action. How can we, if it cannot be done in any other way, arrange a situation whereby women can be given proportional representation rights in the constitution, so that women will also now move out from the district assemblies to the parliament onto the center stage in national politics. We thank you really for coming to delegate. And we have enjoyed these gentlemen. They've come to speak not as the representatives of the association or anything, but as seasoned men who have proved themselves throughout the years in the society, who we have examined, and we have seen that these people are public-spirited people who are also knowledgeable. They have taken the trouble to take a stand in these discourses elsewhere, and we have brought them. We are glad for this special contribution, and we trust that when we call upon them again, they will come. Please, my good friend, Mr. Yeni, I will want you to please bring your views that you have read to us to stage. And everyone here, such views, will very much welcome them. It can be a paragraph, it can be a page. We are putting them all together and bring about representations from the IEA dialogues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.